That same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea. Such great crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat there, while the whole crowd stood on the beach. And he told them many things in parables, saying, "Listen, a sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seeds fell along the path, and the birds came and ate them up. Other seeds fell on rocky ground, where they did not have much soil, and they sprang up quickly, since they had no depths of soil. But when the sun rose, they were scorched. Since they had no root, they withered away. Other seeds fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. Other seeds fell on good soil and brought forth grain, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. Let anyone with ears listen." Then the disciples came to him and asked him, "Why do you speak to them in parables?" He answered, "To you it has been given to know the secrets of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it has not been given. For to those who have, more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. The reason I speak to them in parables is that seeing they do not perceive, and hearing they do not listen, nor do they understand. With them, indeed, is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah that says, 'You will indeed listen, but never understand. You will indeed look, but never perceive. For this people's heart has grown dull, and their ears are hard of hearing, and they have shut their eyes, so that they might not look with their eyes, and listen with their ears, and understand with their heart and turn, and I will heal them. But blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your ears, for they hear. Truly I tell you, many prophets and righteous people longed to see what you see, but did not see it, and to hear what you hear, and did not hear it. Hear then the parable of the sower. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what is sown in the heart. This is what is sown along the path. And for what was sown on rocky ground, this is the one who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy. But the person has no root and endures only for a while. And when trouble or persecution rises on account of the word, that person immediately falls away. As for what was sown among the thorns, this is the one who hears the word, but the cares of the world and the lure of wealth choke the word, and it yields nothing. But as far as what was sown on good soil, this is the one who hears the word and understands it, who indeed bears fruit and yields, in one case 100-fold, in another 60, and in another 30.
Lord, we all show up for different reasons and with different things in mind and different pressing concerns and different levels of faith. And so, God, we avail ourselves to you and ask that some good would come from this morning. We love you. Amen. I think it's ironic and appropriate. This week I've struggled more with the content than I have in quite a while in this series. But the more I understand parables, I think it's maybe a sense of humor of God thing, because it seems to me that part of what parables are designed to do is force us to wrestle and work hard for something. The question is, of course, what is with all of this, like hearing but not hearing, seeing but not perceiving? What's going on there? I think, and this is just my 2 cents, and you can spend some time with it and decide for yourself. I think what's going on here is that both the meaning of the parable and the meaning of parables, which is the section of Matthew that we'll be in for the next couple weeks, I think they're both about attentiveness. All week long I wanted to call it listening, but this morning it was like, I don't think listening is the word. I think it's about presence. about attentiveness. I think it leads to this question: how good are you? Or maybe ask it this way: how would you rate yourself when it comes to being present? Like wherever you are, whatever it is you're supposed to be doing, whoever it is that you're with, on a scale of 1 to 10, nobody gets 5 because that's a cop-out. So how would you rate yourself when it comes to being present, to being with whoever you're with, doing whatever you're doing? What do they say? A goldfish has an attention span of 10 seconds, and some recent research says humans is lower. Like, we're talking about that. Like, how do you do at being with somebody, at watching one screen, not 2, perhaps? Like, even if we don't moralize what the activity is, how good are you at just staying within that activity? What would you rate yourself? And then secondarily, I think maybe this is a good way to get our brains around what we're talking about, because sometimes it's easier to see it than it is to define it. Who is it for you that embodies presence? Like, who is it for you that whether you're watching a game with them or they're studying something, like they're just wherever they're supposed to be, mind, body, soul? Who is that? In fact, if you have your phone, will you pull your phone out? And real quickly, don't check and see if Christian McCaffrey's starting on fantasy today. Don't do that. Just go straight to your text thing. And seriously, I'm just going to ask you, I'm doing it too. Will you just, whoever it is comes to mind, we just quickly text them like, you do presents very well. And then they'll think that you're expecting a great Christmas gift. Now, I think what we're really talking about is this. As you have your phone, will you turn it off? Some of you are like, what? It does actually turn off. I don't know if you knew that. Like, I had to get instructions this week. It's the lower volume button and the power button. So, ready? We're all going to do this. Like, don't do it 4 times, or else Brian will have a phone call and the police will be responding. I did that once on a mountain bike ride where I was trying to turn the volume up, and all of a sudden it was like in my earbud, 911, how can we help you? And I was like, oh no, I'm just riding my bike up on Davis Gulch, and that was an accident. Just turn your phone off? What if that's everything that we're talking about? In fact, what if that's everything that Jesus is talking about in this particular parable? That presence is hard, that listening and attentiveness is extraordinarily difficult. I think for the last 20 years, I've been trying to tell myself that following Jesus was easy. I think that we've built a church around this idea of like, following Jesus is easy, like you're just an American plus you believe in Jesus. And the last thing I want to do is start making Jesus inaccessible. The last thing I'm trying to do is create some kind of self-righteousness. The last thing I want to do is withdraw from culture. But I have to say, I'm not sure I believe it anymore. And I think it's parables like this that drive it home. That it seems like what Jesus is saying is following me. And I think the parables that follow, if you read ahead, say it all the more. Like, it'll take every ounce of yourself, all of your presence, all of your listening ability, and the choice that we get to decide is that a life well lived? So here's where we've been. Let me just dive in and see if I can make this case, because again, what I want to suggest is that tension, the like gulp of my phone off. If that's what Jesus is getting at in our day, in our way, I want to try to make that case. And I want to start back where we left off last week. We've been studying through Matthew in context, chapter by chapter, and I think it's important to look where we ended last week. And if you weren't here, that's okay. But in chapter 12, verse 48, we're going to kind of pick up mid-conversation with Jesus. It says, "But to the one who had told him this, Jesus replied, 'Who is my mother, and who are my brothers?' And pointing, bear in mind, they were there. Like, his mother and brothers were there as he's doing this. And pointing to his disciples, he said, 'Here are my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother.'" Now, in every cultural context, that's wildly offensive, right? Especially in a Jewish context where for generations they've been a minority people. And one thing that minority people are really good at is taking pride in their culture. Add to the fact that they're a part of Abraham's family, and their cultural claim and belief has been for hundreds of years, they are uniquely God's plan for being present on the planet. And Jesus just kind of, for lack of a better word, calls BS on the whole thing. And goes, "You want to know who my mother and brothers are? You want to know who my family is? doesn't have to do with ethnicity or family of origin. It doesn't have to do with faith history or whether or not you're Jewish or whether or not as a man you've had a certain kind of surgery. It doesn't matter about any of that stuff. It's whoever does the will of my Father. Now that's not a Jesus who puts the bar low. That's a Jesus who puts the bar very, very high. And what we explored last week was, I think, in context, what we're talking about is evil. We talked last week that the text never tells us where evil comes from, only what God is doing about it and what we can do about it with God should we jump into his kingdom. We explored this idea of evil and dealing with evil in our own lives last week. In fact, if you were here, we even talked about fasting as this ancient tool for facing temptation. Parenthetically, if you're someone if you're experimenting with that, if you're doing some of that, I would love to know that. I'd love to have that conversation, whether you were to tell me personally or shoot me an email, whether we exchange emails or we go for a walk or have a drink. I'd love to learn with you because I'm very much a noob in this as well. So last week we talked about this suggestion of what does it mean to do the will of God? Well, it means jumping into the kingdom and taking on evil. But one of the things I love about Matthew is the stories are strung together. And I think Matthew's looking ahead to what's next as much as he's looking behind. Look at 13:1. That same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea. Question, why does Matthew give us that detail? And again, what I'm suggesting this morning is an absent chapter marks that kind of cause our brains to go, okay, that part's over, now we're starting a new topic. I think what you see is a connection. And what I want to suggest is, what if what Jesus is doing is answering the question, what does it look like to do the will of God? And what if that doesn't mean follow this rule or that rule, do this thing or don't do that thing? Here's 10 commandments, here's 3, here's 627. What if the answer is attentiveness to the voice of God, to the presence of God, through the text, through people, through community? There's that old song, and he walks with me, and he talks with me, and he tells me I am his own. Like that, what if that's the answer? That it's a relational answer. Verse 3. And he told them many things in parables, saying, listen, a sower went out to sow. Now, who's the sower? Well, I think it's important that we get this right because this is often understood in different ways, and frankly, I think Jesus means it pretty specifically. The sower is God. It's not me, it's not you, it's not Narrate, it's God in this parable. And therefore, then, what is the seed? The seed is, it's the invitation. This is, I think, the beauty of reading Matthew in context. Has the invitation Matthew's been making since the start of his gospel, if you believe these certain things, you can go to heaven when you die. I hope you're starting to see, no, that is such an abomination of what Jesus was about. What has been the message since the very beginning? There's this way of doing life, there's Herod's way of doing life, and then there's what he calls the kingdom of God. The invitation is far more expansive. I had this great conversation with some friends this week where I was just reminded of, okay, so where does the Bible start? Where does it start? What's the setting? If you were to build a set for the opening of the Bible, what would the set be? It would be a garden. And who would be the characters in said garden? Well, you'd have people, Adam and Eve, which represent humanity. You'd have animals. It's kind of like the nativity scene, a chicken or a cow or something. There's creatures, there's creation, there's trees and things like that. What else is there? Evil is there. It's like the uncle, nobody knows how he got there, but here he is. There's this evil. Who else is there? God is there, right? Is God hovering like the nativity scene where angel Gabriel kind of hovers over the barn? Is God hovering above in the story? No, God is present with. What's the invitation Jesus has been making from the very beginning? Has it been, hey, we're going to get to this door, and you're going to go through it, and I'm going to stay here? No. It's a relational connection invitation, isn't it? Or maybe you could think of it this way. Would it make any sense if the story starts with God and people doing things together, reigning together? Wouldn't it make sense that the solution brings it back to something like that? Is the invitation believe certain things and go to heaven? Is the invitation do certain things and that father figure that you've been trying to please your whole life will suddenly see you as good? Is that the invitation? No, what's the invitation? I think that's what we're getting at here. I think it has something to do with presence. Verse 4, and as he sowed, some seeds fell on the path, and the birds came and ate them up. So now we've got 4 types of soil. One in which, and here's one of the questions I think you have to ask. Is the fault with the seed? Is that what Jesus is contrasting? Is Jesus contrasting that some soils have more availability, more opportunity than others? Notice in this case, that's not what he's illustrating. What's he illustrating? There's different types of soil, all given the same opportunities, some of which are fruitful and others are not. Verse 5, other seeds fell on rocky ground where they did not have much soil, and they sprang up quickly since they had no depth of soil. But when the sun rose, they were scorched, and since they had no root, they withered away. So now we've covered 2. Other seed fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. Now we've got 3. 4, other seeds fell on good soil and brought forth grain, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. And this is the question we're asking, isn't it? So what is the good soil, and what is the fruit of said soil? What's going on here? What is Jesus getting at? And I think the reason why this has been such a frustrating study for me is I really do think that this parable and parables in general, they mean the same thing. Look what he says in verse 9. Let anyone with ears listen. What's he saying? It's a confounding part of this parable. What is all this like couching stuff? If anyone with ears listen, anyone with eyes see, what's going on? This is where cultural context was really helpful to me on this one, because what I learned is that this is essentially an idiom. And guess what the idiom means? Something like you have to work for it. Something like you have to really want it. I was taught early on as a communicator, and I think it's a good principle. Good teachers make hard things simple. Question, does Jesus hold himself to that standard? What's he doing here? What if what he's doing is he's saying, this is the type of stuff that you're going to have to really want it. You're going to have to really work for it, which implies what? Doesn't it imply presence? It implies listening. It implies like, but dad, like what does this mean? What does this mean? It implies relational connection. Maybe this will help, or maybe it's annoying. You can tell me later. A few weeks ago, a friend of mine, it's been over a month, a friend of mine who I did student ministry with him when we were young. He doesn't work for church anymore. He bought a landscaping company in Billings. And then I think a year or 2 ago, he bought a greenhouse and a nursery where he has indoor and outdoor plants. And he was always a big idea guy. It's kind of one of the places to be in Billings right now because they've got a coffee shop. And he said they're going to do Santa in December, all kinds of stuff. So about a month ago, I think it was early September, 2 months ago, I just got this picture from him. His name's John. I only hear from him every once in a while. He's a better friend to me than me to him. And I got this text, and it was just a picture. And the picture was of a Japanese maple bonsai tree. Because he knew, we've talked bonsais, he's talked about how he wanted to get into bonsais, and I know that probably means nothing to you, but in the world of bonsais, like Japanese maple is to the bonsai tree what the 1957 two-door Chevy hardtop is to hot rodders. Like, it's the one. It's the hardest to find, it's the most expensive, it's the hardest to do well. So he sent me this picture, and because I am a consummate encourager, I just texted him back, dude, that needs dormancy. In other words, what I was telling him is like, well, congratulations, but they're all going to die. Because he just texted me back something like dude with 3 dots, because he hadn't considered. So here's the context. I've never bought one of these, A, because they're stupid expensive. In fact, I zoomed in on the picture, and I could see that they were $45, and I was like, wow, that is like a third of what they normally cost. So I know some of you are going like, that's a lot of money, but they're usually really expensive, and then the issue is, like all the trees we have outside here, or most of them, it requires dormancy. So doing dormancy with a tree in a little tiny pot in Helena, Montana, it's not all that doable because it doesn't go dormant, it turns into a popsicle. So I've never ventured to buy one, both because they're expensive and because they require dormancy. And I've read about guys who like dig holes in the ground and line it with foam and put straw on there, and then they put a lid on there and they water it and they do all this stuff, and I'm like, nah, I'm out. At some point I have to have some self-respect. So can't do that. So he says, because he's just invested some money in these, he apparently did some research. He said, have you heard of refrigerator dormancy? I was like, what? And so I jump on Google, and because that's what we do. We carry those things around. And I start looking, and sure enough, there's people out there that claim that in climates like this, what you can do is you You have to kind of usher it towards dormancy, which means you leave it outside until it's about 25 degrees, the low at night. It doesn't get below that, so it doesn't turn into a popsicle, but that allows allows the leaves to turn purple in these beautiful colors, and that's why people love them. And the leaves fall naturally, ideally, and then when it gets to about that point, people put them in a bag or some kind of a box, and then they put them in the refrigerator, which my wife said we don't have room. But then they put them in the refrigerator, and then you water them for the course of a few months, and as long as your refrigerator's close to 32, then it just kind of hovers there, and they go dormant, and then in the spring you bring them out, and voila. So he texted me, have you heard of that? I texted him back, I'm in. And I was talking to a friend who actually grows bonsais here, and she's like, I want one too. So then my dad was coming to town, and so they were bringing them. Well, in the meantime, I did some research, and I learned that not only is there the dormancy issue, but because they're kind of a subtropical species, they don't like our hard groundwater, because apparently when it only rains once every 2 years here, there's more mineral in our water. And so that kills them, so you have to buy this stuff that you mix a quarter teaspoon per gallon. The only problem with that is that thing needs like a gallon every 3 months, and so you buy this stuff. It's cheap for a lifetime supply, so I bought some of that. And then I learned that every couple months you have to put vinegar in the water. I still don't know why that's the case. And then, knowing that it needs to stay outside long enough to enter dormancy, I was like, okay, but we've already had days below, or we're going to have days below 25, and we already have, so I bought this like $12 thermostat thing where I could test out, because I have a detached garage, and I wanted to know, relative to the outdoor temperature, how warm is it in my garage? And I learned that it's 15 degrees warmer, so now there's this thing that I have to do where I'm moving it inside and outside, because you can't bring it like inside, because that'll confuse it. So it's kind of a thing. Would you like to meet it? I have no more. I've completely emasculated myself, I know. It was all green when I got it. Isn't that cool? It's amazing, I think. Here's my point. What if what Jesus understands that many of us, most of us don't, is that like fruitfulness is hard? Like getting the right ingredients, hearing the right stuff, the Spirit of God making himself available to us, that's kind of the easy part. What's hard is actually producing fruit with it. I was thinking just this week about this, and some of you know this because you garden, which is amazing because you have 2 weeks every year to garden. But like we go to the grocery store and we buy these, and this is the world we live in, and I just can't help but wonder if maybe part of what we miss in the Gospels is just how hard fruitfulness really is. That so many conditions have to be right to produce something as simple as an orange that we buy in a bag of 40 for $8, even though it was $5 like 3 weeks ago. What if that's what Jesus is getting at here? Peter comes to him, then the disciples came to him, I think it's other Gospels that say it, Peter, and say, why do you speak to them in parables? It's a fair question, right? Like, why don't you just give it to us? Why these stories? Why do you kind of couch it in all this stuff? And Jesus says, to you it has been given to know the secrets of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it has not been given. Now, this can be a really troubling text, especially if you quit here, because it makes it sound like, kind of like the Pharaoh stories with like, well, does God just make himself available to some and not others? But in larger context, what do we know even about the Pharaoh stories and God hardening his heart? Well, it's 20 times that the text says God hardened Pharaoh's heart, and it's 20 times total Pharaoh's heart becomes hardened, 10 of which it says God does it, and 10 of which it says Pharaoh does it. Is this kind of Calvinist determinist thing? I don't think it is. Look at verse 12. For to those who have, more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. What's going on here? Isn't it more of the same? Whoever has ears to hear, you have to work for it. You have to lean into it. This isn't something that you can just kind of think about for a second. What if Jesus isn't hiding? Because part of what he's doing here is explaining what's with all these people and why are most people rejecting him? That's the theme of Matthew for chapters now. And what if part of the answer is it actually takes a lot of work? Like presence. To be present to somebody, it takes work. It takes concentration. It takes sacrifice. What if that's what he's getting at? And as you read through it on your own, you'll see over and over again, he returns to this kind of idiom idea. Whoever has eyes to see, whoever has ears to hear. And what I understand is every time what that means is you got to work for this. You got to wrestle with it. You got to chew on it. You got to want it. You got to meditate on it. You got to keep coming back and really give your all to it. And what's the it? What if it's the person? What if it's the garden? What if it's presence? What if it's relationship? Some of you remember on Christmas Eve, I told this story about a spiritual director who is also a chemistry teacher who sits with juniors predominantly in a chemistry class and sees just the horror on their face as they're introduced to this foreign language, many of whom are trying to be valedictorians and stuff like that, and so they're horrified about their future GPA, and they're wondering if they can do it because chemistry is so intimidating, and he asks this question: what's the second most important thing that has to be true before you can learn anything? And he leads them down this path where what he shows them is, well, you have to be confused. And it's this way of saying, because here we are back to the parables. What the heck? What if Jesus is living within this same principle? Confusion's a good thing. But it's only a good thing, and the spiritual director then goes, okay, so if the second most important thing is being confused, what's the first? And he leads them to this place of recognizing you got to pay attention. You got to want it. You got to lean into it. We like things to come easy. Jesus likes to have our whole heart and soul and mind invested, not just in the idea. I really don't think this is all about the idea. I think it's about the relationship. There are weeks for me where the content is so easy that I can drift through the week and not spend all this time kind of internally talking to God and others about, what does this mean, God? I'm not convinced that's the weeks that honor God best. What if you have to want it? And to whatever extent that's true, like the kingdom demands our whole heart, our whole mind, our whole soul, that God wants this constant presence with us, then that in some sense brings us back to this thing, doesn't it? I mean, this is just one of the things we could pick on, but I've just started with my wife. We're reading Comer's new book, The Elimination of Hurry, and the introduction's written by John Ortberg, and he quotes him as saying this. Go to that next slide. He said, the average iPhone user touches his or her phone 2,617 times a day. But then Ortberg, as this brilliant spiritual thinker, he asked this question: what would my life look like if God touched my mind as frequently as I touch my phone? Here's what I've been thinking about is, if you really think about the function of this thing, like we should be getting paid to carry it around with us, right? Like, because we are not the customer. We know this, and we've studied this, and I put a reference on the mind map. Some of this is a return to stuff we started talking about before COVID, and staring at your phone became a virtue again. But like, if you think about it, what's the product of this? It's your attention. Like, you're not the customer. Your attention is the product that is being sold to who? Google, Facebook, Zuckerberg. I mean, we can all kind of like, oh, these are bad guys, these are good guys. We all do it, but it's all the same. Our attention is fully on the market thanks to the internet. I'm not suggesting that it's all bad. I'm not suggesting we shouldn't ever use it. I am suggesting that I do think the way forward is going to involve some kind of digital asceticism that is going to be foreign to most others. I wonder if in 2021, the biggest inhibitor to the relevance of the parable of the sower is actually the iPhone and the way we engage with technology and the way that it keeps us from doing presence, the way it keeps us from attending to certain ideas and thoughts for a long time. In Psalm 15, the band can start coming up here because I'm going to just kind of end on a couple thoughts. In Psalm 15, David says something like, I fix my mind on you, God. I'm just going to go look at it, and I did not give you a reference for it, Gabby. But I think this is a psalm worth memorizing. Okay, maybe it's not Psalm 15. It's Psalm 16. He says this: I keep the Lord always before me. Because he is at my right hand, I shall not be moved. Dallas Willard says it this way: the first and most basic thing we can and must do is to keep God before our minds. What if what if doing the will of God, what if it's not always about, here's the answer and you know it before it's even been given? What if it's not about these things or those things? What if oftentimes doing the will of God requires having the type of connection with God that has you checking in with and having conversation and seeking wisdom, which means that your mind really does matter? Like, what if fruitfulness from God, it takes more work than we often realize? And frankly, what if the gift of this season, I really am starting to believe that this season is a gift. I think the church is healthier now than that's been in my lifetime. I don't just mean Narrate, I just mean as I talk to people. What if the gift of this season is the realization of like, wait a minute, what were we thinking to think that Jesus could just be like one of our 13 priorities? What if following Jesus takes all of you? Seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eye is good, your whole body will be full of light. If it's bad, it'll be full of darkness. What if this doesn't mean that we have to become religious fanatics or detached from everyday life, but it does mean that we give a lot of energy to living life in the presence of God, and as such, being like his hands and feet in the world. Jesus, thanks that you gave us minds, and that you gave us this thing called attention, that you gave us this keen intellect, God. And my prayer, I guess, this morning is that your people I start with myself, that we would give our minds to higher things, and ultimately to what it means to hear your voice and follow you through life. Amen.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about Narrate Church, find us online at narratechurch.org or look us up on Facebook or Instagram.